On the 12th of May 2003, Freddie Scappaticci stood outside his solicitor's office in Belfast and denied being Stakeknife, the alleged British Army agent inside the IRA. "My statement basically is that I am Freddie Scappaticci," he said. "I am telling you I am not guilty of any of these allegations." By then, the codename had already acquired a powerful defence. Stakeknife was said to occupy a senior position inside the IRA's internal security unit, while secretly reporting to British Army intelligence. His access was considered so valuable that senior military figures reportedly described him as the golden egg, the jewel in the crown, and a source who had saved hundreds and hundreds of lives. The claim sounded simple. Britain protected an exceptionally dangerous informer because the intelligence he supplied was preventing even greater loss of life. Operation Kenova spent 9 years testing that proposition against intelligence reports, witness accounts, historic investigations, and prosecutorial files. Its conclusion didn't produce an exact body count, and it didn't convict every handler or prove every allegation. But it overturned the central arithmetic of the defence. I think it probable that this resulted in more lives being lost than were saved. That sentence, printed on page 18 of the Kenova final report, is the measure that matters. Stakeknife did supply intelligence. The question is whether preserving his position inside the IRA was worth the human cost of allowing that position to continue. The identity remains formally disputed. Freddie Scappaticci is widely identified in journalism, books, and academic work as Stakeknife, but successive UK governments have maintained a neither confirm nor deny policy. Kenova's public findings referred to Stakeknife as one individual, without formally naming Scappaticci. That caveat does not erase the operational story. It defines how the story must be told. By the late 1970s, accounts place Scappaticci inside the provisional IRA and describe his emergence as a British Army intelligence source. The recruitment story is contested. Some accounts say he was approached after arrest. Others describe a voluntary approach through police or intelligence contacts. No single public account settles the sequence. What is clearer is his alleged destination. By approximately 1980, Stakeknife was established as a senior figure in the IRA's internal security unit, commonly known as the ISU or the Nutting Squad. The unit vetted recruits, investigated compromised operations, hunted suspected informers, interrogated people in custody, and enforced internal discipline. Its reach extended into the IRA's most sensitive information: who could be trusted, which operations had been exposed, which members had been arrested, and whether someone inside the organisation was passing secrets to British intelligence. A former IRA member described the ISU as the Clapham Junction of the organisation because everything went through it. The phrase captures why the alleged position was so valuable. An informer in an ordinary IRA unit might report on one cell, one operation, or one local commander. An informer inside the organisation's counterintelligence arm could potentially see the people investigating the IRA itself. He could learn which suspects were being questioned, which names had emerged during interrogation, which operations were considered compromised, and which alleged informers were about to be abducted. The same access created the danger at the centre of the case. A person who knew where the IRA's internal investigations were heading could be both a source of warnings and a participant in the machinery producing those threats. The Force Research Unit, or FRU, was the British Army intelligence formation responsible for recruiting and running agents inside paramilitary organisations. Its purpose was to obtain information from people who could see the activities of groups that outside surveillance couldn't easily penetrate. The alleged Stakeknife arrangement went further than ordinary infiltration. The source was reportedly positioned within the IRA's internal security apparatus while providing intelligence to British handlers through the FRU. Public accounts have described him variously as a senior member, deputy head, second in command, or head of part of the ISU. The exact title and geographical scope remain disputed, so the safest description is senior figure with unusually broad access. Kenova recovered approximately 3,517 intelligence reports attributed to Stakeknife. One summary identified 377 reports during an 18-month period early in his agent career. Investigators later reviewed roughly 90% of the written reports attributed to him. That volume explains why the source was protected. It does not settle whether protecting him was justified. A large archive proves that intelligence was being produced. It does not prove that the intelligence prevented more deaths than the handling arrangement enabled. For British intelligence, the attraction was obvious. The ISU wasn't a peripheral committee. It dealt with the IRA's internal investigations, recruit vetting, suspected informers, compromised operations, interrogation and punishment. Someone inside that structure might expose threats before they became public attacks, identify people at risk, or reveal how the organisation reacted to British pressure. The access also meant that Stakeknife could report on the IRA's response to infiltration. He wasn't simply gathering information about weapons or planned attacks. He was operating close to the body designed to detect people like him. The source's value, therefore, depended on remaining credible to the people around him. That condition shaped the defence of his continued handling. If the British acted openly on every warning, the IRA might infer that the ISU had been penetrated. A rescue, arrest, or raid could protect one person while exposing the source and ending thousands of future reports. In intelligence terms, a single intervention could destroy access. In human terms, the decision not to intervene could leave someone in danger. The public defence rested on three linked claims. Stakeknife had exceptional access. His information produced real operational benefits, and those benefits justified the risks of keeping him inside the IRA. The strongest version came from senior military and intelligence circles rather than from a public, independently audited list of rescued individuals. General Sir John Willsey, a former British Army commander in Northern Ireland, was reported to have called Stakeknife the golden egg and the jewel in the crown of British military intelligence. Willsey was also reported to have said that the agent saved hundreds and hundreds of lives. In 2017, BBC Panorama reported that the Army had assessed Stakeknife's intelligence as having saved approximately 180 lives. The number wasn't presented as a confirmed list of 180 named people whose deaths had been prevented. Reporting described it as a guesstimate that included hypothetical deaths that might otherwise have occurred without arrests, weapons seizures, or other interventions. That distinction changed the meaning of the number. A confirmed rescue is one thing. A counterfactual estimate is another. If an intelligence report leads to an arrest, and the person arrested might otherwise have carried out an attack, the calculation can include a life that was never placed in a documented, immediate danger. Such estimates may be useful inside an agency, but they can't be treated as a casualty ledger. Over time, the internal estimate became the public legend. Hundreds was repeated as if it represented a verified count of people saved. Kenova rejected that scale. Its interim report, published on the 8th of March 2024, estimated that identifiable lives saved through intelligence attributable to Stakeknife fell between high single figures and low double figures, and were nowhere near hundreds sometimes claimed. The report didn't conclude that no lives were saved. It accepted that agent running in Northern Ireland could save lives and significantly degrade terrorist organisations. That general proposition matters. Kenova wasn't arguing that all informers were useless or that every report from Stakeknife had no value. It was testing one source and one handling arrangement. The strongest defence, therefore, survives in a limited form. An informer inside the ISU could provide information unavailable to an external surveillance team. His reports could identify people facing danger, expose internal decisions, assist other intelligence operations, and disrupt activity before it became an attack. Kenova found that some identifiable people were saved through information attributed to Stakeknife. The number was small compared with the public claim, but it wasn't zero. The report also recognized that its estimate could miss indirect benefits. Intelligence might disrupt a plan without producing a named rescue, reduce the IRA's operational capacity, or prevent an attack whose existence was never recorded in a way investigators could later verify. That is the best case for continued handling. It begins with genuine access, includes genuine intelligence, and ends with at least a small number of identifiable lives saved. The cost entered the record through the same access that created the benefit. The IRA's Internal Security Unit investigated suspected informers, detained suspects, conducted interrogations, and imposed punishments. People could be abducted, assaulted, held in unofficial detention, and killed. Kenova-related reporting also examined cases in which individuals were allegedly targeted because of internal disputes or personal matters, rather than because they were genuine informers. The question was therefore larger than whether Stakeknife occasionally supplied a useful warning. It was whether British agencies could preserve his cover while still protecting the people endangered by the organisation he had infiltrated. The mechanism can be traced through the structure of agent running. Stakeknife supplied information about the ISU. British handlers wanted the flow of information to continue. Acting too visibly on the information could reveal that the ISU had been penetrated. Revealing the source would end his access, expose the handling operation, and deprive the agencies of future intelligence. That would create a strong institutional pressure to protect continuity. Kenova reported that security forces were sometimes aware of imminent abductions and murders, but failed to protect people at risk. The investigation described circumstances in which safeguarding the agent appeared more critical than protecting individuals who could and should have been rescued. Some intelligence was reportedly not passed on or acted upon. Some crimes went ahead, and people allegedly responsible remained free to commit further offences. Those findings concern the handling system, not just the alleged conduct of one informer. A source might report a threat, but a warning could arrive late, be incomplete, or be judged unreliable. Different agencies could hold different pieces of information. The FRU, RUC Special Branch, MI5, and other security bodies didn't necessarily share the same records or possess the same authority to act. An intervention could expose the source without guaranteeing that the target would survive. Those limitations matter when assigning criminal responsibility. They don't remove the institutional problem identified by Kenova. The source's access could become more important than the immediate protection of people his intelligence placed at risk. One reported example concerns Joseph Fenton, described as a police agent targeted by the IRA. Forces News reported that Stakeknife warned British Army handlers that Fenton wouldn't survive. Yet no apparent action prevented the killing. The supplied record does not establish the warning's exact wording, timing, recipients, or reliability assessment. It also can't prove that intervention would certainly have saved Fenton. The case therefore can't be presented as a proven decision to sacrifice him. It does show the operational dilemma in concrete form. A warning from inside the ISU could identify a threatened informer, but acting on that warning might reveal the source who supplied it. The same dilemma appeared across a wider body of cases. Operation Kenova considered 107 referrals and accepted 47 for full investigation. Those cases included allegations of murder, abduction, serious assault, firearms offences, perjury, conspiracy to pervert the course of justice, and misconduct in public office. The investigation submitted at least 35 evidential files to the Public Prosecution Service for Northern Ireland. The files contained more than 50,000 pages. Earlier PPS updates referred to 26 files under consideration, reflecting different stages and counts within the long investigation. The cases covered alleged incidents from 1979 to 1994, the period in which the alleged agent was most deeply embedded in the IRA's security structures. PPS summaries grouped 10 early 1980s incidents involving abductions, murders, conspiracies to abduct, a rescue, releases and punishment shootings known as kneecappings. The group included 2 abductions followed by murder, an abduction followed by rescue, a conspiracy to abduct, and the abductions of 4 people, one of whom escaped while 3 were subjected to punishment shootings. A second PPS statement covered 5 incidents between 1987 and 1994. Those included a 1987 abduction followed by release, an abduction and murder in 1988, another abduction and murder in 1989, a further abduction followed by release, and a 1994 murder and abduction. Kenova-linked reporting connected Stakeknife evidentially to at least 14 murders and 15 abduction incidents. Other public accounts have used higher numbers, including 18 murders or broader totals involving the ISU as a whole. Those figures can't be treated as interchangeable. One number may describe cases linked to the alleged agent. Another may describe a larger pool investigated by Kenova. Another may describe murders associated with the unit without establishing that Stakeknife personally participated. The careful claim is the Kenova-linked one. At least 14 murders and 15 abductions appeared in evidential material connected to the alleged agent. That is an investigative link, not a conviction. One named victim was Caroline Morland, a Catholic mother of 3 who was abducted and murdered by the IRA in July 1994. Her case was examined by Kenova. The available material does not establish that Stakeknife personally caused her death or that a specific British handler decision caused it. Her case still matters to the audit because the human cost of intelligence handling can't be reduced to the cases in which a court can prove personal responsibility beyond reasonable doubt. It includes the people exposed to the activities of the unit whose access the state chose to preserve. Other PPS summaries don't provide names for most of the victims. They do provide dates, conduct, and outcomes. An abduction in 1981 followed by murder. Another in the same period, a rescue, releases, punishment shootings, and later killings in 1988, 1989, and 1994. For families, the difference between a case being linked, referred, prosecuted, or convicted determines what the state claims to know about a death and what it can prove. A referral sends an evidential file to prosecutors. It does not mean that a suspect was charged. A prosecution does not guarantee a conviction. A Kenova finding about the balance of lives lost and saved isn't a criminal verdict against every person who handled the source. Kenova met families connected to the cases and provided individual reports explaining its findings. That process placed victims at the center of an investigation that had otherwise been dominated by intelligence terminology: agents, sources, access, reports, and cover. The practical consequences were personal. People were abducted, detained, interrogated, assaulted, released, or killed. Families spent decades trying to determine whether the state had possessed information about what was happening and whether that information had been used to protect the person at risk or to preserve the agent who supplied it. The institutional structure made those questions difficult to answer. The FRU ran the alleged agent. RUC Special Branch operated within the wider intelligence environment. MI5's role was publicly disputed for years. Earlier accounts described it as limited or peripheral, while Kenova-based reporting presented a broader picture in which MI5 had access to Stakeknife's intelligence, received debriefs, provided technical support, and participated in briefing and tasking through the FRU. Kenova-based accounts also stated that MI5 knew of the alleged agent's position inside the ISU. Reporting on the final findings said activity concerning Stakeknife was conducted with MI5's knowledge and consent. That does not mean MI5 personnel ordered every alleged crime. It does mean the handling arrangement extended beyond one army unit and one set of handlers. Kenova also examined the practical protection provided to the source. RTE reporting on the final report stated that British Army handlers took Stakeknife out of Northern Ireland on holiday using military aircraft and military identification, even while he was wanted by the RUC for murder. The flights were reported to have taken place on 2 occasions. That detail establishes institutional investment in keeping the alleged agent safe. It does not prove the allegations against him, and it does not by itself prove that the flights caused a death. It shows that the source was being protected through military channels while ordinary police authorities were pursuing him. The case had already exposed the consequences of secrecy before Kenova was established. In 1993, Danny Morrison and 6 others were convicted of kidnapping an IRA informer. Their convictions were later overturned after intelligence agencies were found to have withheld information from the trial. Reporting connected that withholding to the need to protect Stakeknife's secret role. When a criminal conviction collapses because intelligence was withheld to preserve an agent's cover, the cost of agent running is no longer theoretical. The operation has begun to affect the justice system itself. After the convictions were overturned, the Public Prosecution Service announced that it would examine whether Stakeknife's handlers or their agencies had broken the law to protect him. Referrals and partial investigations followed. Operation Kenova was established in 2016. John Butcher, then Chief Constable of Bedfordshire Police, led the independent investigation. His team operated outside the police service of Northern Ireland and combined criminal investigation, intelligence analysis, disclosure review, forensic work, and engagement with victims' families. In January 2018, Kenova officers arrested Scappaticci on suspicion of several offences. He wasn't charged with the core murder, abduction, or torture allegations. His only reported conviction concerned possession of extreme pornographic material, for which he received a suspended sentence. That legal outcome is often misunderstood. It does not establish that the Troubles-related allegations were false. It means the principal allegations didn't result in a charge and conviction against him. Kenova later gained access to intelligence holdings that previous investigations had not received. The investigation, therefore, examined the lives saved claim in a far broader documentary environment than the public had previously possessed. For years, the Army's reported estimate of 180 lives had circulated without a publicly available case-by-case dataset. The hundreds and hundreds claim came from an attributed senior military figure. Kenova reviewed roughly 90% of the written intelligence reports attributed to Stakeknife and compared those records with witness evidence, files, referrals, and the consequences of continued handling. The result wasn't a larger number. It was smaller. The March 2024 interim report put identifiable lives saved between high single figures and low double figures, nowhere near hundreds sometimes claimed. Crucially, the figure didn't subtract the lives lost as a consequence of continuing to operate Stakeknife. That qualification is the hinge of the case. If an intelligence report helps relocate one person or disrupts one attack, that is evidence of benefit. It isn't evidence that the operation was a net success. The balance must also include people placed at risk by the source's position, warnings that weren't acted upon, crimes left unprevented, and further offences committed by people who weren't arrested. Kenova didn't pretend that every one of those consequences could be counted with the precision of a spreadsheet. It produced a qualified assessment based on the evidence available. The word probable is important because the calculation wasn't a simple subtraction. Kenova could identify some people saved. It could also identify cases, failures, and patterns, suggesting that preserving the source's access exposed other people to harm. But it couldn't assign a certain number to every avoided attack or every death that might have followed an intervention. That is why the report didn't say that exactly a particular number of lives were lost because of Stakeknife. It didn't say that every death associated with the ISU was caused by British handlers. It didn't say that every handler knew the details of every crime. It said the overall outcome was probably negative. The final report was published on the 9th of December 2025. It reaffirmed the interim conclusion that more lives were probably lost than saved through Stakeknife's continued operation, and repeated the estimate of high single figures to low double figures for identifiable lives saved. The report also examined the role of MI5 and called for the government to permit the alleged agent's identity to be publicly named. By then, Freddie Scappaticci had been dead for 2 years. He died in 2023 at the age of 77, without facing trial for the principal allegations. The government still had not formally confirmed that he was Stakeknife. The identity dispute remains part of the legal boundary. It does not prevent the handling arrangement from being assessed. Kenova could examine intelligence reports, agency records, witness evidence, family accounts, and prosecution files without converting the government's NCND policy into a finding of fact. The same principle applies to the alleged offences. Some cases were fully investigated. Some were referred to the PPS. Some weren't upgraded because investigators found no further evidence justified doing so. The PPS concluded that the evidence in the reported files didn't provide a reasonable prospect of conviction. No prosecution resulted from the core murder, abduction, or torture allegations in the supplied material. That does not reverse Kenova's investigative assessment. A decision not to prosecute means prosecutors judged the admissible evidence insufficient to meet the prosecution threshold against particular suspects. It does not establish that no crime occurred. A referral does not mean the evidence was accepted by a court. An investigative link does not mean personal responsibility was proven. Kenova's conclusion about the handling outcome sits at a different level. It's a police investigation's assessment of what probably happened when the state continued to operate the source, not a criminal conviction of every person who touched the operation. That distinction allows moral directness without legal overreach. Kenova didn't claim that no lives were saved. It didn't say every intelligence report was worthless. It didn't say every handler had identical knowledge or criminal intent. It described Stakeknife as a valuable source who provided intelligence about the IRA at considerable personal risk. Then it assessed the arrangement as a whole and found the probable balance negative. The source's usefulness was therefore not enough to justify the operation. The alleged position inside the ISU explains both sides of the equation. It gave Stakeknife access to information that British agencies couldn't easily obtain from outside. It also placed him inside the body hunting informers, interrogating suspects and deciding who should be punished. The public defence treated that access as an asset. Kenova forced the calculation to include access as a liability. The logic of the arrangement was difficult to escape. To preserve intelligence, the agencies had to preserve the appearance that the source was genuinely part of the IRA's internal security structure. To preserve that appearance, they couldn't respond to every threat as openly or quickly as they might have if the source weren't at risk. That didn't guarantee that every missed intervention was deliberate. It didn't prove that every warning was reliable. It did create a system in which intervention could threaten the source, while non-intervention could threaten the target. The same intelligence that made Stakeknife valuable could therefore make his protection dangerous. Kenova's disclosure findings added a second layer to the institutional problem. A separate review reportedly found no evidence that MI5 had deliberately withheld relevant files, while identifying weak historic information management practices that contributed to files being located late. Poor record management isn't the same as a proven conspiracy to conceal evidence. But for families, both can produce the same practical result. Information exists inside the state, while the people affected by it wait without answers. The investigation's value wasn't only the final sentence. It was the process that made the sentence possible. The 3,517 reports, the 90% review, the 107 referrals, the 47 accepted cases, the 35 evidential files, and the prosecution decisions that separated allegations from convictions. Those numbers establish the scope of the audit. They don't create false precision. The 14 murders and 15 abductions linked in Kenova's evidential material aren't a final list of every death connected to the ISU, and they aren't a conviction against Stakeknife. They show that the investigation was dealing with alleged lethal conduct and abduction, not merely with the circulation of intelligence reports. The high single-figure to low double-figure estimate shows that the lives saved claim wasn't entirely invented, but it was far smaller than the public legend. The probable finding connects the two sides. It says that the benefit existed, the harm existed, and, after weighing the handling arrangement, the harm probably exceeded the benefit. The strongest contrary argument remains available. Indirect intelligence benefits may be undercounted. A report could disrupt an attack without identifying a named survivor. It could weaken an IRA unit or expose a future threat that never became visible in the historical record. Counterfactuals are difficult to prove because the event prevented leaves no body, no crime scene, and often no surviving paper trail. Kenova acknowledged that general agent running saved lives. The investigation didn't claim to know every benefit Stakeknife's information produced. But the same problem applies to the public defence. The Army's estimate of 180 lives was also partly hypothetical. Hundreds and hundreds was an attributed claim, not an independently audited list. If the state asks the public to accept counterfactual lives saved, it must also account for counterfactual lives lost when preserving the source allowed threats to continue. That is the central fairness of Kenova's assessment. It does not count benefits as certain while treating costs as irrelevant. It asks what happened because the agent remained in place. The final judgment isn't that Stakeknife's intelligence was worthless, it's that intelligence value alone didn't justify continued handling. An agent isn't vindicated by the number of reports he produces, the rank of the people who praise him, or the danger involved in recruiting him. The relevant standard is whether the information prevented more human suffering than the operation enabled. For Stakeknife, Britain couldn't prove that standard had been met. Operation Kenova reached the opposite probability. I think it probable that this resulted in more lives being lost than were saved. The sentence does not convict every handler. It does not establish that every allegation was true. It does not provide an exact death toll, and it does not erase the people whose lives may have been saved. It does something more precise. It judges the outcome of the handling arrangement. The alleged British Army agent inside the IRA was valuable because he occupied a uniquely dangerous position. That position produced intelligence. It also placed threatened people inside the space between what the state knew and what it chose to do. The title's question is therefore answered at the level the evidence supports. Operation Kenova found it probable that Stakeknife's continued handling cost more lives than it saved. The legal responsibility of individual handlers remains a separate question for evidence and courts. The operational judgment does not.